Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And I'm doing a little bit of a different show this week, and I'll get into that in a moment. Just wanted to start with some thanks. Thank you to everybody who's been listening to the show, whether it's via podcast, whether you're watching it on Spotify or YouTube, your favorite podcast platform. We really appreciate it. We're growing in numbers, we're growing in views and downloads. So just wanted to take a moment to thank everybody, to thank all my guests, my co-hosts, Josh, John, Scott, Courtney now, who's kind of becoming another co-host, which is awesome. And I hope to have her back on again soon. But again, I wanted to thank the listeners. You guys are what makes this show run. Without you guys, there's no show really. So just want to take a moment and thank you all. And I had a request. So if you guys are listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, please, if you like the show, leave a review. If you don't like the show, leave a review. Most podcast platforms, you can just tick off the amount of stars you think we deserve. You can usually leave comments as well. So if you have some feedback for us, constructive criticism, things you like, things you don't like, we'd love to hear it. Just all we ask is please be respectful, be respectful to myself, my guests. We're here trying to entertain you. And if we're not doing that, we want to hear about it. But if we are, we'd love to hear about that too. So tell us what your favorite shows are, what you like about the show, what you would like to see more of or hear more of. And we will definitely take that into account. But the reviews definitely help. And again, it just takes a second. You can just tick off the stars. You don't have to leave a whole paragraph or anything. But if you do, we'd really appreciate that. So please leave a review. If you watch on YouTube, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the videos, and again, commenting. We love the comments. We try to respond to every comment. If we've missed some, we apologize. There's a glitch in YouTube where sometimes it doesn't display the comments. I can see that a comment has come in, but I can't reply. Like it's just not showing up in the YouTube app or on the website, and it's weird. But it does happen maybe 5% of the time. I will get a comment that I can't reply to. I just can't. I get the email notification and then I go to reply to it and it doesn't show up. So I'm not sure what that's about. So if we haven't replied to you, it's not because we don't want to, it's because we just technically can't. But we do love the comments, so please keep them coming. And like I said, please consider subscribing, liking the videos. That definitely helps us out here. So that being said, let's move on to the show. So today I'm going to do, like I said, something a little bit different. I don't typically go on Reddit. It's a rabbit hole that I just don't have the time to deal with usually. It's a wonderful source of information. I do find a lot of things I do need on there, usually stuff about video games or music, or if I have a question, Reddit comes up a lot. So I will go to it, I'll get my answer, and I move on because, like I said, it could be a rabbit hole and just a time sink. So I was on Reddit the other day. I was actually looking for some video game information and came across a thread about creepy stories. People just telling their creepy stories. And I started reading some of them, just a few. Again, I didn't want to get sucked in. But the few I was reading, I was kind of connecting with, either because they were similar to my experiences or similar to experiences that people have had who have spoken to me and told me about. So I wanted to go over, I think I'm going to do 4 stories today, just real quick, and I will read them here. I'm going to share my screen. So if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, you can follow along. If you're just listening on a podcast, I will put the links in the description so you can go and read it yourself, but I will be reading it here as well. So you can kind of hear these stories and just see kind of what people are putting out there. And so I'll read the story and then I'll kind of go into either my own experience or the experiences of others who have sort of told me similar things and just my thoughts on these stories. And I make no claims that these are true. These are just stories on the internet. These are stories from Reddit users. So take them with a grain of salt. I can't vouch for their authenticity, but they all sort of struck me in a way that was interesting to me. And again, before I get into it, I just wanted to say, if you have your own story, we'd love to hear it. You can email me. I'm going to put the links up there. So feel free to email me. If you don't want to be on the show, we don't have to show your face. You can just talk. My son did that. Jake, he didn't want his face on the show. So he just had his audio. If you don't want to speak on the show, you can just email me your account, your experience, and I'll read it on the show. I'll read it on air. I can keep your information confidential. Basically, how these Reddit users are, we can give you a username, or you can just say anonymous. But we'd love to hear your stories. We'd love to just get the word out there. No judgments. Just telling the stories, because again, you just never know who's going to hear your story and say, "Hey, that happened to me." It's happened with a few of my guests so far. If you go back and watch older shows with John, with Rachel, things come up, and it's something you may never have thought about, but someone else has the same or similar experience, and you say, "Hey, wait a second, that sounds familiar." So that's basically what I'm going to do today. So give me a moment. I'm going to share my screen and we'll start with the first story. Okay, so the first story I'm going to share is from user my underscore teeth underscore the letter R underscore fake. My teeth are fake. So I'm going to read his story, or her story. Looking back on my childhood, I think an incredibly creepy set of experiences were taking place, but I was too young to understand the gravity. Only now, and as an adult, can I sort of piece it together. See, my parents bought a rustic 14-room farmhouse that was your typical out in the middle of nowhere affair. Literally miles upon miles of farmland, and in the center of it, our home. Like a lot of the properties around us, we had an unusually long driveway. I'd say this thing was about a quarter of a mile long, ending in a T where the road split. Our mailbox was down there, so was a little white fence. From our living room window, we could look all the way down to the end of the driveway. We could see everything from that picture window. And sometimes at night, we could see things we didn't want to. Some nights, there'd be a man down there. He'd be in a car, parked there, waiting, headlights on. This wouldn't necessarily bother me. Like I said, I was a little kid. But looking backward through time and experience, I remember how worried my parents were, how nervously they watched that car, and yet never once picked up the phone to call the police. They never once approached the man in the car, and I think now they were afraid. Because what would happen if things happened? We were far from town, far from help. It was just me and my mom and dad. And down about a quarter of a mile away was a man who may have been thinking about doing something dangerous. Anything, really. Even though we were never tacitly approached the subject, I guess I knew he was a man. When I walked down the driveway in the mornings to catch the bus, I'd see discarded beer cans and cigarettes, and once a faded picture of my mother. Again, I say, this didn't add up much as a small boy, but as an adult, I wondered who that man was and why were my parents so afraid of him. Okay, so this story, nothing paranormal here, but it is a little bit creepy. There's a guy watching, and superficially, it kind of sounds like a stalker situation. I think one of the comments here, this is from Jester Idiot. I'm guessing that long before your mother was with your dad, she dated a man who was abusive, and somehow she managed to escape him. She met your father, got married, and had kids. Somehow the abusive ex manages to find her and starts stalking her back to your house in the middle of nowhere. I'm speculating based on the faded photo you found. So yeah, I mean that superficially it does seem like a stalker. He's got a picture of the mom. What does bother me is why the father would never intervene, never go down and talk to this guy, never call the cops. It's just weird that they would let him park down there and just stalk them. I have not had experiences like this, but I have heard stories that were similar. And I don't want to tell them exactly, one, because they're not my stories to tell. Secondly, because they're not my stories, I might get some information wrong. But I've heard similar stories about enigmatic men sort of stalking families, being around families, and it's typically to do with the mother, the wife, the woman in the family. It seems that the man always knows her or is obsessed with her. And again, I've just heard these stories a lot, and they can be enigmatic entities sometimes. And again, they seem, this guy's drinking beer, cigarettes. There's probably nothing paranormal about this, but it is interesting that in this story, at least, the father didn't do anything to intervene, to sort of protect his family, to call the cops, to go talk to this guy, to chase him off. So just a creepy story. And it did remind me of a few other people who I've spoken to over the course of my life who've mentioned similar stories. Sometimes it's in a car, waiting outside. their house or down the block from their house and kind of watching them. And other times it's a man walking and following, and uh, the experiencer kind of then sees this man talking to their mother. So I just thought that was very strange and definitely creepy. So that is our first story. Okay, story number two. This is from a user named Space Robot, all one word. Um, and this one's really interesting to me, and I'll get into a few reasons why. But let me read the story to you guys first. So here's the story. I guess I should start off by saying I don't in ghosts or spooks. I guess he forgot believe, or she. I do believe that creepy things happen and that everything is explainable. But after this incident, I really have no idea how to explain it. About 5 years ago, I was working as a photographer at a summer camp. I would frequently stay up late at night editing my pictures to make sure they were ready by the end of the week. One night, I was in our office working on the photos when my boss came into the office and said that an adult guest broke his ankle and she had to drive him to the hospital. During this time, they were living at the camp wherever there was space for them. My boss and her husband were going to drive the guest to the hospital while their two kids slept in these elevated tents up on a hill in the woods. They asked that I go up to the tents and hang out until they got back, just to keep watch of their kids. They recommended I bring a blanket and pillow so I could catch some sleep, since they don't know when they would get back. I walk up the long trail to get to the top of the hill and find the tent with their kids. I claim a bunk and lie down trying to fall asleep. A little while later, I see a light coming up the hill towards the tent. I was glad that they had returned so I could finish my work and get to my own bed. As the light came closer, I noticed that something was strange. Instead of a flashlight beam, it seemed to be an orb of light, and it really wasn't bouncing like a person would carry a flashlight. It was just floating up the hill. On top of that, it was a very bright white light. Oh well, I was tired and glad they had returned, so I didn't think much of it. The light got closer to the tent until it arrived at the entrance. Then the light just sat there, at the top of the entrance, which was about 6 feet off the ground. I thought it was bizarre that they weren't saying anything or coming in. I quickly realized that it wasn't my boss and grabbed my cell phone to check the time. The time was 12:15 a.m. I then decided to shine the light on my cell phone at whoever was holding the light. As soon as I directed my phone towards it, the light disappeared. I was confused, but wasn't really worried. Could have been some younger counselors messing around, or the 4-H camp that was renting some space for the week. Maybe just kids exploring the property. Plus, I was tired and may have dozed off and wasn't thinking straight. I then tried to go back to sleep. About 45 minutes later, my boss returned. I then finished my work and went to bed. The next morning, I was thinking about the light and how strange it was. I then realized that the light didn't come to the front of the tent, but to the back of the tent. The back of the tent faced a really steep hill with tons of trees, brush, thorny plants, and poison ivy. I tried walking through it in the daytime, and it is extremely difficult and dangerous, let alone at night. Then I realized that it didn't make any noise as it came up to the tent. That afternoon, I was telling a coworker about what I saw. As I was telling her, her eyes got really wide. She asked me if I was joking. I told her I wasn't. She then told me that the same night, she and another coworker were outside the offices at midnight, and they saw someone with a flashlight approaching them. They yelled at it, asking who was there. They got no response. Who's there? Still no response, as the light continues to approach them. They get scared and run into the office, hiding while peering out a window. 15 minutes later, it finally went away. When it went away, it would have been 12:15 a.m., the same time I saw the light. So this story, I have some personal experiences with, and I've also heard other people tell stories of this. The orbs. And this is not the ghost hunting orbs that you find in a photograph, which are typically just dust or water vapor or bugs or whatever. I'm talking about somebody seeing these things with their eyes, lights that seem to move. They're small. So very interesting stuff. And I do know some people who've seen them. Again, you hear a lot about these orbs now in connection with Bigfoot. And I don't know why, but certain podcasts, certain stories, there's always this orb being connected to a Bigfoot sighting. So I don't get that. I've had some interesting experiences, and I'll put a link in the description below. So the first one wasn't necessarily an orb. But I was camping with my friend Josh up in the Adirondacks. It was our first trip together, and we were up at Silver Lake Wilderness, and it was a rainy night. The fire had gone out, and I woke up right a little after 1 in the morning, and there was a light outside my tent, kind of in the lower corner by my tent. It was very low. At first, I thought it was the fire. I thought the fire may have reignited. You know, that happens sometimes at night. The wind blows through, and a fire that has kind of died down springs back to life, and you kind of get that glow of the fire. Two things told me this was not the case. One, it wasn't flickering like a fire, it was just like a steady light. Two, it was still raining. It was still raining very, very hard. We had done nothing to sort of protect the fire. We just kind of let it go out. A lot of the wood had been wet, so even the fire that we had was not very big that night. So I knew it couldn't be the fire. Uh, so then what was it? It wasn't Josh. I could hear Josh in his tent. Josh and I are both snorers. We both have issues. Mine is my big nose. So I snore a lot, and so does Josh, and I could hear him snoring away. He was happily sleeping. So it wasn't Josh. And we're pretty deep in, and this is 1:30 in the morning, and it again didn't seem like a flashlight. It wasn't moving. There was no flickering. It was just kind of the steady light kind of towards the bottom corner of my tent. So, like the person in this story, I tried to take out my cell phone and take video of it. Because I at least wanted to document it, because I didn't know what it was. It was just a small little like triangle of light. That's what it looked like, triangular. And I don't know if that was just the pattern of my tent, but I took out my phone to take a video of it, and it immediately went out, just disappeared. So I put my phone away, and I'm watching, doesn't come back. So I fall back asleep. About an hour and a half later, I wake up again, and I look, and there's the light, and it's still raining. The light's in the same spot. Josh is still sleeping, and I'm just watching it, and very slowly kind of reaching for my phone, trying to get my phone. And this is something weird happens at this point. So on the other side, I see outside the tent what looks like a flash going off, like a camera flash. I don't hear anything. Again, it's kind of noisy because the rain is hitting the tent and it's windy. Josh is sleeping, so I know it's not Josh taking a photo, but it just looked low to the ground. It didn't look like lightning. It wasn't coming from the top of the tent. It just looked like a quick camera flash. Again, I grab my phone. Now I'm like determined to take video of this. As soon as I turn my phone on, the light goes out. And then it never came back that night. I woke up a few more times and there was no light, nothing else. The next morning, didn't see any tracks, didn't see any evidence that anybody had been in the camp. Just a weird experience. And I'm not saying it was an orb. I didn't get a chance to even look out of my tent. I mean, we had the rain flaps, we had the tarps. It would have been tough for me to see anyway, but there was definitely this light at the bottom of the tent twice that I saw, an hour and a half apart. So very similar to this story where once the phone comes out, the light disappears. There was another time I was out for a walk one night with my wife on Staten Island, and we're in the city, you know, it's residential, but we're walking, and it was dark. It's probably 9:30 at night, and we're coming to an intersection, and there's a big corner house, and up by like the second floor windows, I see these two orange-ish or amber. They weren't quite yellow, they weren't quite orange, they were kind of something in between. So I say amber colored lights. And there's two of them, and they just kind of, it was like they were by the window, and then they just zipped off as I'm watching them up, kind of in a diagonal trajectory. Very strange. And it was just like split second I saw them. By the time I saw them, they were gone, but there were two distinct balls of light like near the second floor window, and they just zoomed off like kind of as we approached. So I thought that was weird. And again, I have some people that I know that I'm hopefully going to get on the show to tell their story at some point, but who have also seen these balls of light. This story doesn't really say what size it was. This story says it was like a pure white, not that like orangish or amber. The ones I saw were probably somewhere between the size of a tennis ball and a softball. Um, so not huge, not definitely not UFOs. They weren't high up in the air. They were very close, not drones. There was no sound, and they disappeared very quickly. They just kind of were gone. But I do know other people who have had these experiences with orbs uh, in the city, and this has nothing to do with Bigfoot. We're in a residential neighborhood of Staten Island, New York. Um, Nothing to do with Bigfoot. This story seems to have nothing to do with Bigfoot, but just this like orb of light in the woods. And it just, again, when I was reading it, it reminded me of the thing I saw on Staten Island, the thing I saw up in the Adirondacks, just this weird light source that shouldn't be there. And again, in the woods, you can have St. Elmo's fire, the will o' the wisp, the swamp gas. Um, I don't know what it would be in the city. That's just weird to me. And again, why does it go away as soon as the cameras come out? Just very strange to me. So I thought that story was very interesting, and it just kind of stuck with me as I was reading it. And these stories are not even far down the thread. Like I opened the thread, and like the first couple of stories in, I'm like, these I can relate to. So that's why I'm bringing them to you here. So let's go on to the next story. Okay, so this story is brought to us by a user 00, the letter T as in Tom, 3 times, 00. So 00TTT00. Otto. So I'll read their story. A few years ago, I lived in an old studio apartment above a bar. One night, I had a friend over, and we were up late talking about ghost stories. He told me about some creepy experiences he had ghost hunting at abandoned asylums and such. He left around 3 a.m., and I tried really hard to go to sleep. I was still a little spooked and laid awake focusing hard on the ceiling lamp when I suddenly heard the ball chain click and the light turned itself on. I've never been so scared of a light turning itself on. That doesn't just happen, right? I called my friend instantly and we talked on the phone for a bit, but I was too freaked out to turn the light off or try to sleep. Eventually, as it started to get light out, the ceiling lamp clicked back off. Nothing like this ever happened before or after this. The building was old and there were a lot of weird noises there, but this was an isolated incident. Eventually, I moved due to a rat infestation that didn't affect any of the other units and apparently disappeared as soon as I moved out. A friend of mine eventually moved into the unit. She lived there for a year before I see her one day looking a little freaked out. I ask, "What's up?" And she explains that a detective came around wanting to take photos of the layout of the place. I guess 15 years ago, there was a rape/murder of a child in the apartment, and the guy who did it was up for parole. She was already freaked out by learning about the history of the place. I didn't want to make it worse by telling her it was also haunted. It's not the most exciting story, but I felt like a pretty strange series of events. So this story struck me because it reminded me of an experience that happened when I was a kid that I haven't shared on the podcast yet. It happened in my apartment in Brooklyn, which I've mentioned many times on the show. John has had some experiences there. My son Jake had some experiences there. But this one happened when I was a child. I was probably, I want to say 9 or 10 years old, maybe 11. I forget when it was, but it was right after my youngest brother was born. So I was probably about 10 or 11. My other brother and I were outside playing. It was a summer night, and my room was kind of at the other end of this hallway when you come up the stairs. And my uncle was over, so it was probably a Friday night. And, we come up the stairs, and my uncle was kind of facing the hallway, which led to my room. The door was open. And we come in and, we're just talking. And he says, "Oh, that's really cool that you have a timer on your light in your bedroom." And I kind of just was taken aback by that. And I said, "What do you mean? I don't have a timer." And he says, "Yeah." He says, "As you were coming in, I heard you guys coming in. So I looked up. And as I'm waiting for you guys to come up the stairs, the light in your bedroom went on." And very similar to this story, my light didn't have a chain. It had like one of those little like black push plastic pieces that you'd have to push and click it, and then it would come on. And I think that was also connected to a dimmer switch on the wall, which also has to click and then kind of turn on. So just very interesting that, very similar to this story, where it's not just a light coming on. She heard the click And I know in my room, it's either the dimmer switch or the click on the light itself that you'd have to turn on. And the click on the light itself was always on so that I could use the dimmer switch. So I thought that was very weird, and it reminded me of that story. So I wanted to share that. And again, I have friends and other people I know who have mentioned similar stories about lights turning on by themselves that shouldn't. Funny story, my grandparents had these lamps that were basically like you could touch them on. They plug in and you just touch the metal of the lamp and the lamp would go on. It was usually like 3 or 4 settings where you could, dim, kind of medium, bright, and then off again. So you just touch the lamp with your fingertips. And my grandfather would play jokes on my brother when he was younger, because my brother was very young and didn't understand the technology behind it of just completing the circuit. And once they passed, my wife and I inherited the lamps, and one of the lamps, just every morning it would turn on. Like we'd wake up in the morning and it would be on, and we knew we turned it off at night, and that had no mechanism. It just had to be touched. There was no switch. It was just once you plugged it in, you touch it, and that's how you would turn it on or off. And for a while there, it was just every morning, one of the 2 lamps that we had that did this would be on. It was in our dining room, and we just wake up every morning and say, no, I know I turned that off last night. It was faulty, because it's at a certain point we would go turn it off and then just kind of stand there and watch, and it would just come back on. And it did this fairly regularly and reliably enough so that we knew that it was just faulty wiring or a faulty circuit, and it was just kind of turn on or off by itself. And it still does it to this day. But more interesting are these cases where something physically has to be like manipulated, like a switch or a chain has to be pulled or turned. It's not just like a little bit of energy touching the lamp, turning it on, which to me would be a little bit more believable as paranormal. But this is a little bit weird that there's a pull chain, and mine had a dimmer switch, but either way, the lights kind of came on by themselves. And again, I know a lot of people who have other stories of lights going on or off when they really shouldn't. It's not a bulb burning out or, electrical thing. It's like a switch has to be turned or flipped, or something physical has to be moved for the light to go on or off. So again, another interesting story that I thought I'd share. So let's move on to the 4th and final story. Okay, so this last story is brought to us by user CDC underscore, so like Centers for Disease Control, CDC underscore, and I will read their story. This was in broad daylight, which for some reason makes it creepier to me. I was in training for this security company I used to work for. In order to get OC spray certified, you had to take a 4-hour course, but you get paid for the 4 hours, so it's not like I was going to complain. I had been in the class for about 2 hours, and the instructor was just telling stupid story after stupid story about bad things that happened with pepper spray. I didn't give a shit. I was never going to use the stuff. Where I worked was not some place where I was going to need the pepper spray. I was just taking the class because it looked good on me to be certified. So I'm looking around the room, and the building had security cameras all around it, and there were monitors all over the room we were sitting in. I'm looking at one of the monitors, and I noticed this round black blob kind of looked like something wrong with the video, but it was hovering in the parking lot, then started moving towards the camera. I'd say it was translucent. Then it moved away and started moving to the other side of the building. It went off, I guess he means off, screen, and then it picked up on the next screen over, then moved toward the building we were in. I wasn't really scared. I was more just like, what the hell is that? And I didn't want to say anything because for some reason I felt like the minute I said something, it would go away. Like trying to tell someone to look at a shooting star. By the time they look, it's long gone. There was a big bang on the door. The instructor stopped what he was doing and went through the office to check it out. Nothing. I looked back up to the monitor and saw the black blob moving back across the parking lot and then back across the street at an extremely fast pace. It was going up and over all the cars that passed, and then it was out of sight. Not a fucking clue what the hell that was. I never mentioned it to anyone in the class, and I actually haven't ever mentioned it before. I haven't really even thought about it in years, but when I read this question, it immediately popped in my mind. It was so strange. Oh well, I'll probably never know. Now this one, of course, to me, kind of sounds like a shadow person or a shadow figure or the Hat Man, just a black sort of translucent blob. Shadow people typically take on a bit of a more humanoid figure when they're seen. But it's interesting to me that this guy saw it on a video camera, like a security system, which usually don't have very good resolutions. So I do wonder if there was some distortion. Of course, a lot of these security camera footage things turn out to be bugs or birds or dust. So very easily could be debunked. Again, I take these stories with a grain of salt. Who knows if these people are telling the truth or not? I don't see why they would lie. But again, another interesting story. And we've had John was on the show. He had seen a shadow figure. My son Jake was on the show. He has seen a shadow figure. I know a lot of people who've seen shadow figures or the Hat Man or shadow people, whatever you want to call them. I've seen a few in my time. And again, I don't know what to make of them. I don't know if they're just tricks of the eye, tricks of the mind, but I've seen two. And both of them, one of them looked very human like in humanoid in shape. It had an arm, it had a head, it had shoulders. It was about human height. The other one I saw sound more like this. It was a blob, and it was not very human acting. The other one was kind of peeking around a door at me. The second one I saw was basically a blob, and it kind of came down from the ceiling and looked and then went back up. It was very strange. And again, the second one, I got a sense that it was looking at me, but there was no sense of head or arms. It was just like this amorphous blob that just kind of looked at me. And I can tell that story on another show, but that happened at the governor's house at Snug Harbor, which I believe I've talked a little bit about for the matron's house in another episode, which I will link below. So again, this story just struck me because it definitely sounds like a shadow person or the Hat Man or whatever we want to call these things. So, and again, I know a lot of people, even people who haven't been on the show yet, who've seen shadow people out of the corner of their eye or shadow figures or these sort of blobs. So I thought this was a very interesting story. And again, this is like page one of this thread on Reddit. And I'm just going to scroll up because I forget what the original question even was. They reference it here. So I'm just scrolling up. What is the creepiest, strangest thing that has happened to you? So that is a very open-ended question. There's a lot of stories in here about just people being followed or a weird guy at what I assume was Blockbuster who liked looking at the girls' belly buttons. Like, some of the stories in here are just very funny and weird and, creepy people, not necessarily paranormal or unexplained. But some of the stories are just like this, sort of unexplained, a little creepy. Not sure what to make of them. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and go back. So yeah, I will put the link to the Reddit thread in the description below so you guys can check it out and just see if there's any more stories in there that resonate with you. And if they do, we'd love to hear about it. So you can, again, always shoot me an email. I'll put my email address up here. We'd love to hear your stories. We'd love to hear your comments. And before I go, I just want to give a shout out to two podcasts that I am watching somewhat religiously now. First one is Spooky Island Radio, my friend Andy. I love giving you shout outs, man. You're a good guy. Love your show. And I know you love the shout outs, so I'm giving you another one here. So Andy, Spooky Island Radio, awesome show. Check them out. They do a lot of missing 411 stuff. He does a lot of these like campfire tales, and he's got great sound effects and music. I mean, just really creepy and great to listen to at night. Just really well produced, and I'm a little jealous of his production values. He just does a really great job. The other one I want to talk about, Two Ghouls podcast, Katie and Sam, and they do a show every Wednesday night. They do it live. I was trying to watch it last night, girls, and I kept getting phone call after phone call, and I just missed it. So I have to watch the archived version. But I really wanted to watch it live. I try every Wednesday, and like every Wednesday when you guys go live at 6:30, it just seems like that's when my phone starts ringing and things happen. So Two Ghouls, I'll put the links below for Spooky Island and for Two Ghouls, but please check those guys out. They're all great. They do great work. And I love supporting my fellow podcasters. Good people, good content. And again, like I said, if you like the show, give us a like, give us a review. I'm not asking for 5 stars unless you think we deserve it. Some people always ask, give us the best review. I don't want that. I want honest reviews. So if you guys have constructive criticism, please let us know. Please just be respectful. We've had some trolls recently concerning a specific show that I'm not going to talk about, but people have been really rude to myself, to my guests, and we don't mind constructive criticism. We love debate. We love to talk. We love differing points of view. So if you have them, please let us know, but please just be respectful about it. We're all here. We're all on the same team. We're all in the same, we all have the same goals. We just want to get to the bottom of these things. We all enjoy the paranormal. So yeah, if you have comments, suggestions, criticisms, let us know. Please be respectful. And until next week, everybody, rock and roll.
Moonlight glowing, it fades on me and you, casting dancing shadows. The earth is draped in blue. Here in this moment, time is standing still.